The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard, as Captain Marcus stood at attention beside the grand entrance. His red uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and his expression remained stern as always. For 15 years he had served as a royal guard, protecting the royal family with unwavering dedication. But today would be different from any other day in his long career. A small figure caught his attention from the corner of his eye. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, had somehow wandered past the outer gates. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her feet bare against the cold stone. She clutched a wilted flower in her tiny hand and looked up at the towering palace walls with wonder in her eyes. Marcus felt his training kick in immediately. Unauthorized civilians were not permitted on palace grounds. He should call for backup, escort her out, and file a report. But something about the child's innocent face made him pause. She wasn't a threat. She was lost and scared. "Hello there, little one," Marcus said softly, kneeling down to her level. His voice was gentler than he had used in years.
"What brings you to the palace today?"
The girl's eyes widened with fear. She had heard stories about the royal guards being strict and mean. But this tall man in the fancy uniform was speaking kindly to her. "I wanted to give this flower to the princess," she whispered, holding up the wilted bloom. "My mama said the princess is sad because her puppy died." Marcus remembered hearing about the princess's beloved pet passing away the week before. The entire palace had been in mourning with the young royal. He looked at the simple flower in the child's hand and felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Compassion that went beyond duty. "That's very thoughtful of you," Marcus replied. "What's your name?" "Emma," she said, still clutching the flower. "I walked here from the village. It took me all morning." Marcus realized the girl had walked nearly 5 miles on her own, driven by pure kindness for someone she had never met. Other guards would have escorted her away immediately, but Marcus found himself making a different choice. He stood up and extended his hand to her. "Would you like me to help you give that flower to the princess?" he asked. Emma's face lit up with joy. She nodded eagerly and took his large gloved hand in her small one. Marcus led her through corridors he had walked thousands of times, but today they felt different. He was seeing them through the eyes of a child who found magic in every golden frame and crystal chandelier. When they reached the princess's chambers, Marcus spoke quietly with the lady-in-waiting. He explained the situation and watched as the woman's expression softened. Within minutes, Princess Isabella emerged from her room. At 16, she carried herself with royal grace, but her eyes still showed the sadness of losing her beloved companion. "Your Royal Highness," Marcus said formally. "This young lady has traveled far to bring you something." Emma stepped forward, suddenly shy in the presence of real royalty. She held out her wilted flower with trembling hands. "I'm sorry your puppy went to heaven," she said in her small voice. "This flower is to make you feel better." Princess Isabella knelt down and accepted the humble gift with the same grace she would receive the finest jewels. Tears gathered in her eyes as she looked at the simple act of kindness from a stranger. "Thank you, Emma. This is the most beautiful flower I have ever received." Marcus watched as the princess and the village girl talked for nearly an hour. They sat together on a marble bench in the garden, sharing stories about pets and favorite flowers. The princess showed Emma the fountain where her puppy used to play, and Emma told her about the cat she had found in her barn. When it was time for Emma to return home, Princess Isabella insisted on giving her a small token, a silver locket with a tiny flower engraved on it. "So you'll always remember that kindness travels both ways," the princess said. Marcus arranged for a palace carriage to take Emma safely back to her village. As he watched the carriage disappear down the winding road, he reflected on what had happened. He had bent protocol, risked his position, and allowed his heart to guide his actions instead of his strict training. That evening, as Marcus stood at his post during the changing of the guard, Princess Isabella approached him. This was unusual. Royalty rarely spoke directly to guards except to give orders. "Captain Marcus," she said quietly, "thank you for what you did today. Emma's visit meant more to me than all the formal condolences I've received. You reminded me that kindness exists in the simplest gestures." Marcus bowed his head respectfully. "Your Highness, I simply did what felt right." The princess smiled. "That's exactly what made it so special. Not everything we do needs to follow protocol. Sometimes the most important moments happen when we choose compassion over rules." As the weeks passed, Word of Marcus's act of kindness spread quietly among the palace staff. It became a story told in hushed voices during shift changes and meal breaks. The stern captain who had shown mercy to a lost child, who had facilitated a moment of genuine human connection in a world often bound by formality and tradition. Emma visited the palace twice more that year, always bringing small gifts from her village, fresh bread her mother had baked, wildflowers from the meadows, drawings she had made of the princess and her new puppy. Each time Marcus was there to greet her, and each time he was reminded that sometimes the greatest act of service is simply treating others with unexpected kindness. The little girl from the village had changed something in the palace that day. She had shown everyone that genuine care and compassion could bridge any gap between social classes, that a wilted flower given with pure intention could be more valuable than gold, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person in uniform could do was to let their humanity show through their duty. Guard Lieutenant Sarah Williams had always prided herself on following orders exactly as given. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, and her dedication to protecting the royal family was absolute. She had earned her position through years of rigorous training and unwavering discipline. But on this particular autumn evening, all of her training would be tested in a way she never expected. The annual Harvest Festival was taking place in the capital city, and the palace was hosting a grand celebration. Nobles from across the kingdom had arrived in their finest carriages, wearing their most expensive gowns and jewels. Sarah was assigned to patrol the palace gardens, ensuring that no unauthorized guests wandered into restricted areas. As she walked her usual route past the rose garden, Sarah noticed movement near the servants' entrance. A figure was hunched over by the kitchen door, rummaging through the waste containers. Her hand instinctively moved to her weapon as she approached cautiously. "Stop right there," Sarah commanded in her most authoritative voice. "State your business on palace grounds." The figure turned around slowly, and Sarah found herself looking at an elderly man. His clothes were patched and worn, his gray hair uncombed, and his weathered hands shook slightly as he raised them in surrender. In one hand, he clutched a half-eaten piece of bread he had found among the discarded food. "Please, miss," the old man said in a weak voice. "I meant no harm. I was just so hungry and there was so much food being thrown away." Sarah's training told her to arrest the man immediately. Trespassing was a serious offense, and theft of any kind on palace property was punishable by imprisonment. She should call for backup and have him removed from the premises without hesitation. But something in the man's eyes stopped her. They weren't the eyes of a criminal or someone with ill intent. They were the eyes of someone who was desperate, tired, and ashamed. His thin frame suggested he hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, her voice softer than before. "Thomas, miss. Thomas Miller. I used to work at the flour mill in the East District until it closed down 6 months ago. Haven't been able to find work since then." The man's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. Sarah knew about the mill closing. Many families had been affected when the owner moved his business to another province. She also knew that the palace kitchens prepared enough food to feed 3 times the number of guests at tonight's celebration. Mountains of perfectly good food would be thrown away after the event. "When was the last time you had a real meal, Thomas?" she asked. The old man thought for a moment. 3 days ago, I think. A baker in the market gave me some old bread that was going stale." Sarah looked around to make sure no other guards were nearby. She was about to make a decision that could cost her career. But she couldn't bring herself to arrest a starving man for trying to survive. "Come with me," she said quietly, "and don't say a word." Thomas looked confused but followed her as she led him around to the back of the kitchen building. Through a small window, Sarah could see the kitchen staff preparing plates of leftover food to be discarded. She tapped gently on the glass. Cook Martha, a woman who had worked in the palace kitchens for over 20 years, opened the door. She looked surprised to see Sarah with an elderly stranger. "Martha," Sarah said in a low voice, "this is Thomas. He's having some hard times and could use a meal. I was wondering if you might have anything extra." Martha looked at Thomas with the same compassion that Sarah had felt. The cook had grown up poor herself and understood what hunger felt like. Without asking any questions, she nodded and disappeared back into the kitchen. Minutes later, she returned with a plate piled high with roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread, and even a small slice of cake from the royal dessert table. She also brought a large cloth bag filled with more food. "For later," Martha explained to Thomas. whose eyes had filled with tears at the unexpected kindness. Thomas sat on a wooden crate behind the kitchen and ate slowly, savoring every bite. Sarah stood guard nearby, watching for other patrol officers while the old man enjoyed his first real meal in days. She couldn't help but notice how his entire demeanor changed as his hunger was satisfied. His shoulders straightened slightly and some color returned to his cheeks. "Why are you helping me?" Thomas asked when he had finished eating. "You could get in trouble for this." Sarah thought about her answer. "Because you're not a criminal, Thomas. You're just someone who needs help, and sometimes helping people is more important than following rules." When Thomas was ready to leave, Sarah walked him to the edge of the palace grounds. But before he left, she did something that surprised even herself. She reached into her own pocket and pulled out some coins, her own money that she had been saving for a new pair of boots. "Take this," she said, pressing the coins into his hands. "It's not much, but it should help you get some food and maybe a night's shelter." Thomas stared at the money in disbelief. "I can't take this from you, miss." "You've already done so much, please," Sarah insisted. "I want you to have it. And Thomas, there's a construction job opening up near the harbor next week. My brother works there. I could put in a good word for you if you're interested." The old man's eyes lit up with hope for the first time in months. "You would do that for me? A complete stranger?" "Everyone deserves a chance to get back on their feet," Sarah replied. As Thomas walked away into the night, carrying his bag of food and clutching the coins Sarah had given him, she felt something she had never experienced before in her years of service. She felt proud of herself in a completely different way than usual. Not proud of following orders or maintaining security, but proud of choosing compassion when she had the power to make a difference. 2 weeks later, Sarah received a letter delivered to the palace. It was from Thomas, written in careful, shaky handwriting. He had gotten the job at the harbor and had found a small room to rent. He was earning enough money to feed himself properly, and even had a little left over to help other people in need. The letter ended with words that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. "You didn't just give me food that night. You gave me back my dignity and hope. Thank you for seeing me as a human being when I had forgotten that I was one." Sarah kept that letter in her uniform pocket and read it whenever she needed a reminder that sometimes the most important part of serving and protecting people wasn't about following protocol. It was about recognizing when another person needed kindness more than they needed justice. The winter storm had been raging for 3 days when Guard Sergeant David Chen received the emergency call. A group of travelers had become stranded on the mountain pass that led to the Royal Hunting Lodge. Their carriage had broken down in the blizzard, and they were trapped with no shelter and rapidly dropping temperatures. The situation was dire, and rescue efforts were being organized immediately. David had been stationed at the remote outpost for 2 years, responsible for monitoring the mountain roads that led to the royal retreat. It was usually quiet work, but when emergencies arose, he was often the first line of response. He gathered his survival gear, checked his communication equipment, and prepared to venture out into the dangerous weather conditions. The rescue team consisted of David and 2 local mountain guides who knew the treacherous terrain. Fighting through wind and snow that made visibility nearly impossible, they made their way toward the last known location of the stranded travelers. The temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, and David knew that exposure to these conditions for too long could be fatal. After 2 hours of difficult travel, they finally spotted the overturned carriage partially buried in a snowdrift. David's heart sank as he approached the scene. The situation looked worse than he had imagined. The wooden carriage was damaged beyond repair, and there was no sign of life around the wreckage. "Hello," David called out through the howling wind. "Is anyone there?" "This is Palace Security," a weak voice responded from somewhere nearby. Following the sound, David discovered a small cave-like shelter that the travelers had managed to create using parts of their broken carriage and some rocks. Inside, he found a family of 4, a mother, father, and 2 young children all huddled together for warmth. The father, a merchant named Robert, was clearly in bad shape. His leg appeared to be broken, and he was shivering uncontrollably from the cold. The mother, Elena, was trying to keep her children calm while battling her own fear and exhaustion. The 2 children, a boy about 8 and a girl about 5, were scared and crying softly. "Thank goodness you found us," Elena said with relief in her voice. "We've been here since yesterday. My husband is hurt, and we're running out of ways to stay warm." David quickly assessed the situation. The injured man needed medical attention, the children were showing early signs of hypothermia, and the weather was getting worse by the hour. Standard protocol would be to call for additional rescue personnel and wait for a proper medical team to arrive. But David could see that this family might not survive long enough for help to reach them through the storm. "We need to get you all to safety immediately," David decided. "There's an emergency shelter about half a mile from here, but we'll need to move quickly." The problem was Robert's broken leg. He couldn't walk, and carrying him through the deep snow and dangerous terrain would be extremely difficult. The mountain guides suggested that they take the woman and children first, then return for the injured man once they were safe. David looked at Elena's face when this suggestion was made. The fear and anguish in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving her husband alone, even temporarily. The children clung to their father, refusing to let go. "No," David said firmly. "We're not splitting up this family. We'll find another way." Using his emergency radio, David contacted the palace and requested immediate helicopter rescue. But the weather conditions made flying impossible for at least another 12 hours. They were on their own. David made a decision that went far beyond his normal duties. He gave his own warm winter coat to Elena, wrapped his emergency blankets around the children, and began constructing a makeshift stretcher for Robert using broken pieces of the carriage and rope from his pack. "You don't have to do this," Robert said weakly as David worked. "You could get yourself killed trying to help us." "That's not how this works," David replied. "I took an oath to serve and protect people. That doesn't just mean royalty, it means anyone who needs help." With the assistance of the mountain guides, David managed to create a system for transporting the injured man. It would be slow and exhausting work, but it was their only option for keeping the family together and getting them all to safety. The journey to the emergency shelter took nearly 4 hours. David and the guides took turns pulling the makeshift stretcher through the snow, while Elena carried the youngest child and helped the older boy walk. David's own body temperature was dropping dangerously low from giving away his protective clothing, but he pushed through the discomfort. Every few hundred yards, they had to stop to rest and check on everyone's condition. David used his own body heat to warm the children when they started showing signs of severe cold exposure. He shared his emergency food supplies with the family, keeping only small portions for himself and the guides. When they finally reached the shelter, David immediately started a fire and began treating Robert's injuries with his first aid supplies. The shelter was basic but warm and dry, exactly what the family needed to recover from their ordeal. As the hours passed and everyone began to warm up, the true extent of David's sacrifice became clear. He had given away most of his protective gear, used up his emergency supplies, and pushed his own body to dangerous limits to ensure the family's safety. "Why did you risk so much for strangers?" Elena asked as she watched David tend to her husband's broken leg with careful precision. David paused in his work. "My job is to protect people, but beyond that, when I saw your family scared and hurt, I couldn't imagine leaving anyone behind. You would have done the same thing if you had found my family in trouble." The next morning, when the storm finally cleared, the helicopter rescue team arrived to transport everyone to medical facilities. Robert was taken to the hospital for proper treatment of his leg, and the children were examined to ensure they had no lasting effects from their exposure to the cold. Before they parted ways, Elena pressed a small object into David's hand. It was a simple wooden carving of a mountain that Robert had made during one of their previous trips to the region. "This was supposed to be a gift for the children's grandfather," she explained, "but I want you to have it. Every time you look at it, remember that your kindness and courage saved our family. You didn't just do your job, you went above and beyond what anyone had the right to expect." David kept the wooden mountain on his desk at the outpost. Whenever he looked at it, he was reminded that sometimes the most important moments in a person's career aren't about following procedures or impressing superiors. They're about the times when you have to choose between what's safe and easy versus what's right and necessary. Years later, David would learn that Robert had fully recovered from his injuries and that the children had grown up healthy and strong. The family never forgot the guard who had risked his own life to keep them together during their darkest hour, proving that true honor sometimes means putting other people's needs before your own safety and comfort. Guard Captain Elena Rodriguez had built her reputation on being tough, fair, and completely incorruptible. In her 12 years of service, she had never accepted a bribe, never looked the other way when rules were broken, and never let personal feelings interfere with her duty. Her fellow guards respected her, and even the most difficult nobles treated her with caution and respect. But today, all of that would be challenged by a situation she had never encountered before. The morning started like any other at the palace gates. Elena was conducting the routine security briefing when a commotion erupted near the main entrance. A young woman was arguing loudly with the gate guards, demanding to speak with someone in authority. Her voice was desperate, and she seemed on the verge of tears. Elena approached the scene to assess the situation. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s, wearing a simple dress that had seen better days. Her hands were dirty, suggesting she worked with them for a living, and her eyes held a mixture of determination and fear that Elena recognized immediately. "What seems to be the problem here?" Elena asked in her professional tone. The young woman turned to face her. "Please, I need your help. My name is Maria Santos, and my younger brother has been arrested, but he didn't do anything wrong, I swear it on my life." One of the gate guards stepped forward. "Captain, she claims her brother was falsely accused of stealing from Lord Harrison's estate. She wants to petition the royal court for his release." Elena knew the procedure for such requests. Citizens could petition for audience with royal officials, but the process typically took weeks or even months. Meanwhile, if the young man was truly innocent, he would be sitting in prison for crimes he didn't commit. "Tell me exactly what happened," Elena said, her voice slightly softer than usual. Maria's story poured out in a rush of words. Her brother Carlos worked as a stable hand for Lord Harrison, one of the wealthiest nobles in the kingdom. 3 days ago, a valuable gold watch had gone missing from the Lord's private chambers. Carlos had been in the house that day delivering feed for the horses, and when the theft was discovered, he was immediately accused and arrested. "But Carlos would never steal anything," Maria insisted. "He's the most honest person I know. He once walked 5 miles to return a coin he found that belonged to someone else. Lord Harrison just needed someone to blame, and Carlos was an easy target because he's poor." Elena listened carefully to the story. Something about it didn't sit right with her. Lord Harrison was known for being quick to judge and harsh with his servants. She had heard similar stories before about his treatment of workers, but proving wrongdoing against a powerful noble was nearly impossible. "Do you have any evidence of your brother's innocence?" Elena asked. Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "This is Carlos's work schedule. It shows he was only in the main house for 20 minutes that day, and he was never alone. There were other servants with him the entire time." Elena examined the document. It appeared legitimate, with detailed timestamps and signatures from supervisors. If accurate, it would be difficult for Carlos to have committed the theft during such a brief window with witnesses present. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" Elena inquired. "I tried," Maria said, her voice breaking. "But no one will listen to me. Lord Harrison has influence with the local magistrate. They say the case is closed and Carlos will be sentenced next week. Please, you have to help me. He's all the family I have left." Elena found herself in a difficult position. Interfering in noble affairs was strictly forbidden for palace guards. Her job was to protect the royal family and maintain security, not to investigate civilian crimes or challenge the decisions of local courts. Getting involved could result in her dismissal or worse. But as she looked at Maria's desperate face, Elena couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that justice was not being served. She had dedicated her life to upholding what was right and protecting the innocent. Could she really walk away from someone who might truly need her help? "Wait here," Elena told Maria. "Don't leave the palace grounds." Elena spent the next several hours using her connections and resources to investigate the case discreetly. She contacted friends in various departments, reviewed records, and even spoke with other servants who worked for Lord Harrison. What she discovered made her blood boil. Carlos was indeed innocent. The real thief was Lord Harrison's own nephew, a young man with gambling debts who had stolen the watch to pay his creditors. But rather than face the scandal of having a thief in his own family, Lord Harrison had decided to blame an innocent servant who had no power to defend himself. Elena also learned that this wasn't the first time such a thing had happened. Lord Harrison had a pattern of blaming servants for problems in his household, and several innocent people had suffered because of his actions. Armed with this information, Elena faced a choice that would define her character: She could report her findings through official channels, which might eventually clear Carlos but would take months and might not be successful against a powerful noble. Or she could take direct action, knowing it would put her own career at risk. Elena chose a third option that surprised even herself. That evening, she requested a private audience with Prince Alexander, the king's younger son who was known for his sense of justice and fairness. It was highly unusual for a guard to request such a meeting, but Elena's reputation for integrity earned her a brief appointment. In the prince's private study, Elena laid out everything she had discovered. She presented the evidence of Carlos's innocence, the proof of Lord Harrison's nephew's guilt, and the pattern of abuse that had been happening for years. Prince Alexander listened carefully to every detail. When Elena finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Captain Rodriguez," he finally said, "you realize that by bringing this to me, you're essentially accusing a noble of corruption and false imprisonment?" "Yes, Your Highness," Elena replied, "and I'm prepared to face the consequences of that accusation if I'm wrong. But I believe the evidence speaks for itself." The prince studied the documents Elena had gathered. "You could have ignored this situation entirely. Why did you choose to get involved?" Elena thought carefully about her answer. "Because being a guard isn't just about following orders or protecting buildings. It's about protecting people and upholding justice. If I ignore injustice when I have the power to stop it, then I'm not really serving the values I swore to defend." 2 days later, Prince Alexander intervened personally in Carlos's case. The young man was released from prison, and a discreet investigation revealed the true thief. Lord Harrison's nephew was quietly sent away to face justice, and Lord Harrison himself received a stern warning about his treatment of servants. Maria found Elena at the palace gates the day after her brother's release. Tears of joy streamed down her face as she thanked the guard captain who had risked her position to help a stranger. "I don't know how to repay you," Maria said. "You saved my brother's life and restored our faith in justice." Elena smiled, feeling a satisfaction deeper than any she had experienced from following routine orders. "You don't owe me anything. Just remember that there are people in positions of power who will do the right thing when it matters." Word of Elena's actions spread quietly through the palace, earning her the respect and admiration of her fellow guards and staff. She had proven that true honor sometimes required going beyond the written rules to serve a higher purpose, protecting the innocent and ensuring that justice prevailed over privilege and power. Lieutenant James Morrison had always believed that duty came before everything else. His father had been a royal guard and his grandfather before that. The Morrison family had served the crown for 3 generations, and James took enormous pride in continuing that tradition. He was known throughout the palace as someone who never questioned orders and never deviated from protocol. But on this foggy Tuesday morning, everything he believed about duty and honor would be challenged by an impossible choice. The alarm bells began ringing at dawn, echoing through the palace corridors with urgent intensity. James was immediately summoned to the throne room, where he found chaos and confusion among the royal staff. Princess Catherine, the king's eldest daughter and heir to the throne, had vanished during the night. Her bed had not been slept in, her guards had seen nothing unusual, and there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. King Edward was beside himself with worry and rage. He paced the throne room like a caged animal, barking orders at everyone within sight. The royal family had received several threats in recent months from political dissidents, making the princess's disappearance even more alarming. "I want every guard, every servant, every person in this palace questioned immediately," the king commanded. "Someone must know something about where my daughter has gone." James was assigned to lead the investigation team searching the princess's private chambers and interviewing her personal staff. As he meticulously examined every inch of the room, he discovered something that made his heart sink. Hidden beneath the princess's mattress was a hastily written letter in her own handwriting. The letter revealed a secret that could destroy the royal family and throw the kingdom into political chaos. Princess Catherine had fallen in love with Michael Harrison, a commoner who worked as a blacksmith in the village. They had been meeting secretly for months, and now they planned to elope together. The princess wrote that she could no longer bear the pressure of royal duties and arranged marriages to foreign princes she had never met. James stared at the letter with growing dread. According to royal law, the princess's marriage to a commoner would automatically remove her from the line of succession. More importantly, Abandoning her royal duties during a time of political unrest could be seen as treason against the crown. If this information became public, it would create a scandal that could weaken the monarchy for generations. His duty was clear. He should immediately report his findings to the king and organize a search party to bring the princess back by force if necessary. But as James read the princess's words describing her desperation and her longing for a normal life, he found himself thinking about the young woman he had known since she was a child. James remembered teaching Princess Catherine basic self-defense when she was 12 years old. He had watched her struggle with the weight of royal expectations, seen her cry after particularly difficult lessons about diplomacy and statecraft. She had once confided in him that she felt like a bird in a golden cage, beautiful but trapped. Now, at 22, she had finally found the courage to choose her own path, even if it meant giving up everything she had been born to inherit. James understood that bringing her back against her will would essentially be sentencing her to a life of misery and duty, without love or personal fulfillment. But James also understood the larger implications of his decision. The kingdom was facing external threats and needed strong, stable leadership. Princess Catherine was intelligent, capable, and beloved by the people. Her abdication would leave her younger brother as heir, and Prince William was only 16 and completely unprepared for such responsibilities. As James wrestled with his conscience, he made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of reporting to the king immediately, he quietly left the palace and rode to the village where Michael Harrison worked. He needed to see the situation for himself before determining his next course of action. He found the blacksmith shop easily enough, but it was closed and appeared to have been abandoned in haste. Neighbors confirmed that Michael had disappeared during the night, along with a young woman they assumed was his sister visiting from another town. James knew he was running out of time. The king would expect his report soon, and other search parties were already scouring the countryside. He had to make a choice that would define not only his career, but his entire understanding of what it meant to serve with honor. Following his instincts and his knowledge of the local area, James rode to an old hunting cabin deep in the forest that he remembered the royal family using years ago. His hunch proved correct. Smoke was rising from the cabin's chimney, and he could see 2 horses grazing nearby. James approached the cabin quietly and knocked gently on the door. After a moment, Princess Catherine opened it, her face pale with fear when she recognized him. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I suppose you've come to arrest me." "May I come in, Your Highness?" James asked quietly. Inside the small cabin, James found Princess Catherine and Michael sitting together by the fire. They both looked terrified but also determined. Michael, a young man with honest eyes and calloused hands, stood protectively near the princess. "We're not going back," Princess Catherine said defiantly. "I've made my choice and I'm prepared to face the consequences." James looked at the couple for a long moment. He could see genuine love between them, the kind of connection that transcended social classes and royal protocols. He also saw the fear and uncertainty in their eyes as they prepared to start a completely new life with nothing but each other. "Your Highness," James said carefully, "do you understand what you're giving up? Not just the crown, but your family, your home, everything you've ever known." Tears filled the princess's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "I understand perfectly. And I also understand that I'll never be truly happy living a life that was chosen for me by others. I love Michael, and I want to build a life with him based on our own choices." James made a decision that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Instead of arresting the princess and bringing her back to face her father's wrath, he sat down at their small table and helped them plan their escape. "There's a ship leaving from the eastern port tomorrow night," he told them. "The captain is an old friend who asks no questions about his passengers. I can arrange safe passage and provide you with enough money to start fresh in another kingdom." Both Catherine and Michael stared at him in amazement. "Why are you helping us?" Michael asked. "Aren't you supposed to bring her back?" James thought about his answer carefully. "My duty is to serve the royal family's best interests. Sometimes that means protecting them from external enemies, but sometimes it means protecting them from a system that would destroy their chance at happiness." The next 24 hours were the most stressful of James's career. He had to maintain his normal duties while secretly arranging the princess's escape. He used his own savings to purchase traveling clothes and supplies for the couple, and he contacted his friend Captain Reynolds, who commanded a merchant vessel that regularly sailed to distant kingdoms. When James returned to the palace that evening, he faced the most difficult performance of his life. He had to look King Edward in the eye and report that the search had found no trace of the missing princess. The king's anguish was painful to witness, but James forced himself to maintain his composure. "We'll expand the search tomorrow," James told the king. "I believe she may have traveled farther than we initially thought." That night, James made one final trip to the forest cabin. Princess Catherine had written 2 letters, one to her father explaining her decision and expressing her love for her family, and another to her brother William, offering him advice and encouragement for his future role as heir. "Give these to them after we're safely away," she requested. "I want them to understand that this wasn't a rejection of them personally, but a choice I had to make for my own survival and happiness." James watched as the couple rode away into the darkness, headed for the port where their new life would begin. As their figures disappeared into the night, he felt a mixture of sadness and relief. He had helped someone he cared about find freedom, but he had also betrayed his oath of service in a way that could never be undone. 3 days later, James delivered the princess's letters to the royal family. The king's initial rage gradually gave way to a deeper understanding of his daughter's feelings. Her letter explained that she would always love her family and her kingdom, but that she could not sacrifice her entire life for duty alone. Prince William, though young, showed remarkable maturity in accepting his new responsibilities. He told James privately that he had always known his sister was unhappy, and that he respected her courage in choosing her own path. Months later, James received a letter from a distant kingdom. Princess Catherine, now simply Catherine Harrison, wrote to thank him for his kindness and to let him know that she and Michael were happy and building a good life together. She had found work as a teacher, using her education to help children in their new community, while Michael had established a successful blacksmith business. The letter included a small pressed flower and a message that James treasured. "Thank you for showing me that true loyalty sometimes means having the courage to let someone go. You gave me the greatest gift possible, the freedom to choose my own destiny." James kept the letter and the flower in his personal belongings, a reminder of the day when he chose compassion over rigid duty. He continued to serve the royal family with dedication, but with a deeper understanding that true honor sometimes required making difficult choices that went beyond written orders. Years later, when Prince William became king, he would often seek James's advice on matters of policy and governance. The young king had learned from his sister's experience that leadership meant balancing duty with humanity, and he valued the counsel of the guard who had shown such wisdom and courage in an impossible situation. James's decision that night in the forest had changed not only the life of a princess seeking freedom, but it also influenced the character of a future king who would rule with greater compassion and understanding because of the lesson he had learned about the true meaning of service and sacrifice. Senior Guard Robert Chang had earned his position through 25 years of flawless service to the crown. At 52 years old, he was respected by younger guards as a mentor and trusted by the royal family as one of their most reliable protectors. His record was spotless, his loyalty unquestioned, and his retirement was just 2 years away. But on this humid summer evening, Robert would face a situation that would test everything he believed about justice, mercy, and the true meaning of honor. The annual summer gala was one of the most prestigious events in the kingdom's social calendar. Nobles, diplomats, and wealthy merchants gathered at the palace to celebrate the harvest season and conduct important business. Robert was assigned to oversee security for the event, managing a team of 12 guards positioned throughout the ballroom and gardens. Everything proceeded smoothly for the first 3 hours of the celebration. The guests danced, dined on elaborate delicacies, and engaged in the complex social rituals that defined high society. Robert made his regular rounds, checking with his team and ensuring that all security protocols were being followed properly. It was during his 4th inspection of the Eastern Wing that Robert noticed something unusual. A young man in servant's clothing was moving through the corridors with purpose, but he wasn't carrying anything or appearing to perform any specific duties. More concerning, Robert didn't recognize him as one of the regular palace staff. Following at a distance, Robert watched as the young man entered one of the guest chambers that belonged to Ambassador Thornton, a wealthy diplomat known for his collection of rare jewels. The room should have been empty, as the ambassador was attending the gala downstairs. Robert approached the chamber quietly and listened at the door. He could hear the sound of drawers being opened and items being moved around. It was clear that a theft was in progress. His duty was obvious: apprehend the criminal immediately and turn him over to the palace authorities. But when Robert quietly opened the door and stepped inside, what he saw stopped him in his tracks. The young man was indeed going through the ambassador's belongings, but he wasn't pocketing expensive jewelry or gold coins. Instead, he was desperately searching through papers and documents scattered across the desk. "Stop right there," Robert commanded, his hand moving to his weapon. "Step away from the desk and identify yourself." The young man spun around, his face filled with panic and desperation. He appeared to be about 20 years old, thin and poorly dressed, with the calloused hands of someone who performed manual labor. But it was his eyes that caught Robert's attention. They held not the cunning look of a professional thief, but the desperate fear of someone facing a terrible crisis. "Please," the young man said, his voice shaking. "I'm not stealing anything valuable. I just need to find one document. It's a matter of life and death." Robert studied the scene more carefully. The expensive jewelry and gold items in the room were untouched. Only the papers on the desk had been disturbed, and the young man was clutching a single document in his trembling hands. "What's your name?" Robert asked, not lowering his guard but speaking in a less threatening tone. "Peter Walsh," the young man replied. "I work in the stables for Ambassador Thornton. Or at least I did until yesterday." Robert recognized the name. Peter was indeed employed at the ambassador's estate, and Robert had seen him around the palace on several occasions when the ambassador visited. He was known as a quiet, hard-working young man who sent most of his wages home to support his widowed mother and younger siblings. "Explain to me what you're doing here," Robert said, "and it better be the truth." Peter's story came out in a rush of desperate words. 3 days ago, Ambassador Thornton had accused him of stealing a silver candlestick from his private dining room. Peter insisted he was innocent, but the ambassador had dismissed him immediately and threatened to have him arrested for theft. Even worse, the ambassador was demanding that Peter's family pay compensation for the stolen item, money they didn't have. "But I found out the truth," Peter continued, holding up the document. "This is a receipt showing that the ambassador sold that candlestick to a merchant 2 weeks ago. He's been planning to blame me for its disappearance all along, probably to collect insurance money while also getting rid of an employee he didn't want to pay." Robert examined the document Peter had found. It was indeed a bill of sale, clearly showing that Ambassador Thornton had sold the candlestick in question. The date on the receipt was 2 weeks before Peter had been accused of stealing it. "This proves my innocence," Peter said desperately. "But if I don't get this evidence to the magistrate before tomorrow morning, they're going to issue a warrant for my arrest. My family will lose our home trying to pay the compensation, and I'll go to prison for a crime I didn't commit." Robert found himself in an impossible situation. Peter was technically guilty of breaking into a private chamber and going through someone else's belongings without permission. But he was also an innocent man trying to prove that he was being framed by a corrupt diplomat who was abusing his power and position. "You realize that what you've done here tonight is also a crime?" Robert pointed out. "Breaking and entering, even to prove your innocence, is still against the law." "I know," Peter said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "But what choice did I have? Ambassador Thornton has money and influence. Who would believe the word of a stable hand against a diplomat? This document is the only proof I have that he's lying." Robert thought about the ambassador's reputation. Thornton was known to be arrogant and demanding with his servants, and there had been whispered rumors about his business practices being less than honest. He was also the type of man who would use his position to destroy someone weaker rather than admit to his own wrongdoing. Looking at Peter's desperate face, Robert made a decision that went against every rule in his training manual. Instead of arresting the young man, he walked over to the window and stood with his back turned. "I'm going to check the security of this window," Robert announced loudly. "It's going to take me exactly 5 minutes to complete this inspection. During that time, I won't be able to see anything else that might be happening in this room." Peter stared at him in amazement, slowly understanding what Robert was offering him. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if someone wanted to leave this room through that door while I'm focused on my window inspection, I probably wouldn't notice," Robert replied without turning around. And if that same person happened to take only what rightfully belonged to them, well, that wouldn't really be theft, would it? Thank you, Peter whispered, his voice full of gratitude. I'll never forget this kindness. Robert heard the young man move quickly toward the door, but he kept his eyes fixed on the window as he had promised. When his 5-minute inspection was complete, the room was empty except for himself, and everything except the incriminating document appeared to be exactly as it had been before. The next morning, Robert learned that Peter had successfully presented his evidence to the magistrate, who immediately dismissed all charges against him. Ambassador Thornton was quietly investigated for fraud and eventually recalled to his home country in disgrace. Peter was rehired at the palace stables, where he continued to work with dedication and gratitude. 2 weeks later, Peter approached Robert during a shift change. He handed the senior guard a small wooden carving he had made during his free time, a detailed sculpture of a horse that showed remarkable artistic skill. I wanted to give you this, Peter said quietly. It's not much, but it's something I made with my own hands. I wanted you to know that your kindness saved not just me, but my whole family. Robert accepted the gift with genuine appreciation. You don't owe me anything, Peter. You were innocent, and innocent people deserve a chance to prove it. But you took a huge risk for someone you barely knew, Peter pointed out. That takes a special kind of courage, Robert smiled. Sometimes being a guard means protecting people from more than just physical danger. Sometimes it means protecting them from injustice, even when that's the harder thing to do. As Robert approached retirement, he would often look at Peter's wooden horse carving and remember the night when he chose to trust his instincts about right and wrong, rather than blindly following procedures. It had been one of the most meaningful moments of his long career, proving that true honor sometimes meant having the wisdom to know when rules should serve justice rather than preventing it. Peter went on to become one of the most trusted stable hands in the palace, and eventually opened his own small workshop where he created beautiful wooden carvings. He never forgot the guard who had given him a second chance when he needed it most, and he often told the story to his own children as an example of how one person's compassion could change the course of an entire life.